3, 2, 1.
And to have a volume car that is viable in the world market, it had to sell well in the Northern Hemisphere. And that brought us to Timmins, and it brought us to the whole advent of cold weather testing.
Motoring 92 is brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, one tough motor oil.
The city of Calgary, in fact all of Western Canada, have had one of the mildest winters in recent memory. They tell me they were golfing in January. In fact, they tell me they were golfing just a couple of days ago, until we arrived. And when we arrived, the snow started to fall here in Calgary, and the temperature right now is hovering just below zero. Hello everybody, and welcome to Motoring 92. Well, you know, maybe this cold weather isn't such a bad thing after all, because our first story this week has to do with cold weather testing. In this case, the cold weather testing of English-made automobiles. And you know, when I was young, my dad always told me you couldn't trust an English car in the winter. Well, as we're about to see, the times, they are a-changing.
Okay, guys, I gotta go to work now. So I'll see you when I get back.
Oh, your purse.
Oh, okay, thanks very much.
Here.
And as usual, I left the phone number on the cupboard in case you have any problem. You give me a call, okay?
Okay.
All right, and I'll see you when I get back, okay?
All right. Drive
All right.
carefully.
Thank you, bye.
I love you.
Bye, Rob. I love
Bye,
you
Mom.
too. Bye, Jimmy.
Meet Debbie Desjardins. This mother of two lives in the northern Ontario city of Timmins. It gets cold in Timmins during the winter months, with the mercury rarely rising above minus 30 degrees Celsius. But thanks to the frigid temperatures, Debbie has one of the most sought-after jobs in town. She is a test driver for Jaguar, and she is about to begin the overnight shift.
Well, we've been coming to Timmins as a company for just over 10 years now. And we come every winter in order to prove our cars in the severe winter conditions that exist here.
Jaguar staked its entire future, and to a greater extent much of its reputation, on the successful launch of the new XJ6 range in 1987. We realized that to be a player in the luxury car market, we needed a volume-oriented product. We didn't have one. The XJ6 was going to fill that void for us, and to have a volume car that is viable in the world market, it had to sell well in the Northern Hemisphere. And that brought us to Timmins, and it brought us to the whole advent of cold weather testing.
A lot of the drivers that we're employing at the moment are people we've employed before. We tend to get a good recall rate on our drivers. They're hired locally because we want to put people in the cars who know the conditions here. We want to get the opinions of people who are unconnected with the company, so unbiased opinions, to make sure we get a fair reflection on the systems that we're putting on the cars.
We have a nickname for this car. We call it the Moose Chaser, because somebody hit a moose with it. We check the doors and the handles to make sure that everything's operating okay. Lights are all working inside. Well, there were a lot of people looking for the job, so it was, I figure, a miracle that I got picked. They always have a lot of applications for the few jobs that are open. The qualifications they're looking for basically are just an ability to be able to drive decently and have a good driving record and a proper license for it. We've never had a shift yet that we haven't started. There's only been maybe 1 or 2 shifts that we've been pulled off the road in the 4 years that I've been working because of weather conditions. But that's what the cars are here for, is bad weather testing, cold weather testing. So the colder and the worse the conditions are, better for the cars to be tested.
KC base to 7771 for radio check, come in.
Okay. This is JC71 for radio check.
Receiving you loud and clear, Debbie. Have a good night now. Over and out.
Thanks very much, Peter. You too. We'll see you at the end of the shift. We use the radios to maintain contact with our base at all times, whether we're in the country or in town. Also, we can maintain contact with each other from car to car.
Before we first came here, most of our testing had been done in England. And of course, with the winters there being just down to about 0 degrees centigrade, we weren't necessarily finding problems that could occur at -30. So by coming here, then we exposed those problems and we've been able to put them right. We've been able to improve these systems because we've had our engineers here and they've been able to see the problems for themselves rather than trying to imagine them back in England.
Back there in England, they do pay attention to what we have to say. I've noticed changes in the seats, in the seating, and the heating, and the lights.
And how are they as far as a winter car?
They're great. I can't see any problem with them. Even the little rag tops here, they're warm. A lot of people will ask me how the rag tops are, and I say they're fine. The heating is okay. The wind noise is okay. It's not there, and you keep nice and warm in them. They're very comfortable.
What's coming in here? That's the football results, very important. Oh, Newcastle lost again.
Do you find back home they try and keep you in touch with what's going on, whether it's soccer or politics?
Oh, they look after us. Yes, we'll get the football results, and any scandal in the news will come through. They look after us quite well.
Do you miss home at times?
I certainly miss going to the football matches. we went to a couple of hockey games, but they're not up to the standard of a good football match, I don't think.
Right?
Good morning.
Good morning.
How was it?
Tiring.
Was it?
Very tiring. But it was okay. It was alright. Put on good miles.
How many miles you put on?
I'll have to check and see. Around 140, 130.
So now you're back home to get the kids off to school?
That's right.
So Timmins represents testing of future models more so than current models. So you could never really close the door on future model testing. There has to be some consistency in that area. And as you can see, Timmins offers consistency of weather. So we're going to be here for a while, I would think.
Believe it or not, the inspiration for the RX-7 came from a go-kart.
Test Drive with Graham Fletcher.
This week on Test Drive, we look at the hot new Mazda RX-7, a car that is guaranteed to increase your heart rate and your blood pressure. Without a Cray supercomputer, the third generation RX-7 would not exist. To ensure the car retained a true seat-of-the-pants feel, Mr. Kobayakawa, the chief engineer, insisted that every member of the design team learn to drive properly. The result is a sports car in the true sense of the meaning. Believe it or not, the inspiration for the RX-7 came from a go-kart. Go-karts, you see, combine a superb power-to-weight ratio with a low center of gravity. As you'll see, you'll find both of these qualities in the RX-7. The design team wanted the RX-7 to have both a natural and neutral handling characteristics. To achieve this goal, they adopted a highly sophisticated, fully independent double wishbone design that virtually eliminates toe change during spirited driving. The result is a setup that imparts an agile yet very stable feel. During the pylon test, we set a new speed record for the trip through the cones. The record speed, just about 70 kilometers an hour, is a full 7 kilometers an hour faster than any other car tested. Not too shabby to say the very least. Under the hood is Mazda's 13B rotary job. While it shares the same designation as the old unit, this engine is different in just about every area. To begin with, there are 2 turbos and 2 air-to-air intercoolers. The turbos work sequentially, the primary turbo working all the time with the secondary one freewheeling until it's required. The sequential design effectively eliminates turbo lag and ensures a smooth progressive torque curve. Power output is rated at 255 horses and 217 pounds-feet of torque. This means there is 1 horsepower for every 11 pounds of car, a wonderful power-to-weight ratio. 85% of the available torque is produced at 2,000 RPM. This makes throttle response instantaneous and spectacular. It also means that one must always be aware of throttle-induced oversteer. If you stand on the gas pedal in mid-corner, you can expect to spin off the road. During the acceleration test, we required 5 seconds to eclipse the 100k mark. To ensure the power gets to each of the rear wheels, Mazda have adopted a torsion differential. This diff allows the 2 primary functions of a limited-slip diff to occur at the same time. A marked improvement over the viscous-type limited-slip diffs found on many cars. It should come as no surprise that the trunk capacity on this car is not one of the RX-7's fortes. As you can see, the trunk area is quite small and it's very shallow. However, not all is lost, because in behind the front seats there are a couple of quite large and definitely very handy storage bins. The focus of the cockpit is very much the driver. All primary and secondary driving controls are placed within easy reach and have been angled towards the driver to help operation. The pedals are of the racing variety, allowing heel and toe operation. They've even managed to put the dead pedal in the right place and at the right angle for once. The dash itself has a nostalgic look. All the 5 gauges have been ringed with chrome bezels. This adds a sort of MG feel to the car. The brake system employs ventilated discs front and rear with racing-type 4-piston calipers. Add to this twin brake boosters and a 3-channel 4-sensor Bosch-based ABS system, and you have more than adequate stopping power. During the brake test, we required 116 feet to stop from 80k. Interestingly, to ensure the hot air being exhausted from the oil coolers and intercoolers does not hamper brake performance, Mazda have ducted the system such that it exhausts just behind the front wheels. Here you have an automobile that is about as perfectly proportioned as any car can get. I mean, the contours are wonderful, the styling is beautiful to look at. Then you get to the front and you have these ugly pop-up headlights. Perhaps somebody should have told Mazda about projection headlights, because at night time these things destroy the aerodynamic efficiency they've managed to get into the body style. Anyway, that's my pet peeve, and it's now time to go to the scoreboard for a rundown on the 1993 Mazda RX-7. In requiring only 5 seconds to rip through the 100k mark, the new RX-7 is one of the faster production cars in the world. It also ensures a fun quotient that is second to none. The near-perfect weight distribution, low center of gravity and a sophisticated suspension setup ensure the appropriate handling characteristics. The manner in which the car devoured the pylon test was nothing short of extraordinary. The brake system employed on the RX-7 owes a lot to the systems found on racing cars. As such, the 116 feet required to stop from 80k is good, but what's reassuring is that you're unlikely to encounter brake fade at an inopportune moment. The suspension system on the RX-7 is firm. Rock solid may in fact be a better term. This and the 50 series tyres mean you feel every single pebble and imperfection on the road. That said, the feel is definitely not out of place on this car. During the test, we averaged 12.5 litres per 100 kilometres or 22.5 miles per gallon. The high and low figures were 14 miles per gallon and 28 miles per gallon respectively. One thing I must comment on is the oil usage we incurred during the test. While I accept that rotary engines must consume oil to ensure proper lubrication, the 2 litres I had to add to the test vehicle was a little excessive. In fairness to Mazda, though, the vehicle tested had been thrashed, and that probably accounts for a large percentage of the problem. In conclusion, the RX-7 is quick, agile and certainly fun to drive. At the same time, it's totally impractical and fairly costly. However, with my first substantial lottery win, I'm going to put one in my driveway for sure.
The annual auto issue of Consumer Report is out, and it's encouraging news for slumping domestic car manufacturers. The magazine ranked its cars by overall score, and American vehicles were in the top 10 of every category. The scores are a result of several years of testing. The judges consider safety, quality, reliability, and price. General Motors Saturn became the first Big Three automobile in 20 years to win the highest rating for mechanical reliability.
You know, last year in the city of Toronto, local politicians made a brilliant move when they decided to mothball all their electric trolley buses and replace them with those good old air-polluting monsters. Well, out here in Calgary, a clean environment is obviously still a concern. Light rapid transit, better known as LRT, is now a mainstay in getting around the city of Calgary. All right, it's now time to head to the garage and join Bill Gardner. This week, Bill wants to talk about something that we all tend to take for granted.
Now, you'd never use your right foot on the clutch pedal as I just did there, but I'm trying not to block our cameraman. Now, once in a while, it's a good idea to use a couple of fingers to test that clutch before you start driving the car. Just make sure that you have enough free play in that clutch system, and that's part of what protects it from unnecessary abuse and wear. Just take 2 fingers, make sure that that free play is there. You don't have enough power in your fingers to push it any farther than just the free play, and that's about the right amount right there. It's pretty easily adjustable in most cases. And today we want to have a look. You can see by the wear on that pedal that this is a system that gets an awful lot of abuse. The ribs have all disappeared. Used to look like that one, but it's worn smooth. So this is a system that gets an awful lot of use in today's driving. It's a pretty expensive part of your car. Replacing the clutch can be very costly. And if you understand it a little bit better, it'll help you understand why it costs so much and maybe how you can go about saving some of that wear and tear on it. Now here we are on the bottom side of this same car, and of course the clutch allows us to decouple the engine from the transmission. Now the clutch itself lives in this area right in here that we refer to as the bell housing. I'm sure you've heard that term used before. Now when the clutch is depressed, this particular one's actuated by a cable, but we could also have a linkage here, a mechanical linkage, or a hydraulic slave cylinder that drives this clutch fork back and forth to disengage the clutch. And this is the clutch fork right here. It disappears through this boot into the bell housing, and the boot keeps any debris from entering that clutch area. Now we've also got a return spring right here that tops that pedal out and returns it after we release our foot from the pedal. Now, in the next segment, we're going to remove the transmission from this car, remove the bell housing, and you'll be able to see the clutch and the internal components a little bit better. Okay, remember just a minute ago we had the clutch cable hooked up to this fork? Well, what I've done now is I've pulled the transmission, this 5-speed unit, down out of the car, and I've hung it by a couple of ropes so you can see it better. Now, there's the rest of that clutch fork that we talked about right there. And when you step on the clutch pedal to disengage the clutch, you move this fork and release bearing ahead towards the engine, and you press it up against the clutch pressure plate. Now this release bearing has to spin up quite easily, and you can see here the input shaft of the transmission. That's this splined unit here, and this nose on the front of the input shaft goes right into the back of the crankshaft and spins around inside the pilot bearing. Now this area here, this cavity known as the bell housing, is where the whole clutch assembly revolves. Now I'm going to duck underneath and we'll come around to the back of the engine. We can have a look at what this whole works looks like. Now at the back of the engine we've got the flywheel. That's this large circular piece here, and you can see some teeth, a gear around the outside. That's the ring gear that the starter motor engages to start the engine. This is the clutch pressure plate, this unit right here. This is a diaphragm style clutch. There's the diaphragm fingers right there, and that polished area on the diaphragm fingers is what our release bearing or throw-out bearing presses against, and it pushes these fingers from here down into about here to disengage the clutch. Now just past that you can see this splined unit. that's the clutch disc, and there's our input shaft. We've cut one off a transmission, and it slides into those splines something like that. And this is the unit we would use to assemble a new clutch, to align it so that our transmission will go back in easily. Now, start the engine up. You can see that the whole works revolves with the engine. The flywheel, pressure plate, and disc are all spinning around as one. Now, when we press on the clutch pedal, remember that we push those diaphragm fingers in, and that inner piece that's splined to our input shaft, the clutch disc, it comes to a stop so that we can shift the transmission into first gear and pull the car away gradually. Okay, shut her off. Now we're going to take this assembly over to the bench and take it apart, separate it so you can see exactly how it works. Sandwiched between the pressure plate and flywheel is our clutch disc. Now it's lined with asbestos, and when you press on that clutch pedal to release, you're going to press these fingers on the diaphragm in. That's going to move this surface backwards, okay, and free up our clutch disc and allow us to shift gears or come to a stop and sit there in first gear with the clutch depressed. At that point in time, the clutch disc comes to a stop, the flywheel's still turning, the pressure plate's still turning. When we want to launch the car, this pressure plate will come forward and it will sandwich the disc between the pressure plate and flywheel and accelerate our car away gradually. Now, there's our little stub shaft from our transmission, and you can see the splines again. There's the clutch disc, and there's the wearing surface on our flywheel. This is a large, heavy component, remember? And if you slip the clutch excessively or burn it out, this flywheel can become all blue and heated and distorted, and it may have to be reground at a machine shop when you do a clutch job. This clutch disc is subject to wear and tear, and eventually it will wear out if you're too hard on it. The pressure plate as well is another item subject to wear. And if you go easy on your clutch and don't use any more engine RPM than necessary to pull a vehicle away, and you don't ride the clutch or slip it excessively, this component, this assembly can last an awful long time. But if you're hard on it, or you drive the car with no free play in that clutch, as we mentioned earlier, you're going to wear it out much sooner. It's going to cost you a lot of money to replace it. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 92.
Beautiful condominium by the ocean, luxury cars, palm trees. What else could you want in your retirement? I'll tell you next on Kenzie's Corner.
Kenzie's Corner with Jim Kenzie.
I'm here in Naples, Florida. As you can see, it's the Lincoln Town Car capital of the world. It's sort of a retirement community for rich guys. Now, Naples is on the same latitude as Miami, except it's on the Gulf Coast. But if there was such a thing as Naples vice, I think it would involve contraband Geritol. They say that the average age of the citizens here is deceased. Now, that makes driving here a bit of an adventure. Let's face it, some of the Masters Tour drivers are a bit past their prime. You have to stay sharp because you're never sure whether some of these old darlings are going to see the stop sign, let alone stop for it. Now, I don't mean to insult our older viewers. It's just that as we age, our physical skills diminish, and we have to find ways to compensate. Now, the Canada Safety Council offers a program called 55 Alive, a driver training program aimed specifically at seniors. It's cheap, it's fun, and it's very effective. So I'd suggest that older people check into their local senior centers and see what sorts of programs are available for you. Then, when you retire, you can come on down here to Naples and get yourself your own town car. Oh, see if you can find a Jack Nicklaus designer edition. I'm Jim Kenzie.
We're now at Olympic Plaza in downtown Calgary. Behind me, City Hall. But what I'd like to show you is what's beneath me. Now, back in the '88 Winter Olympics here in Calgary, Calgarians and visitors alike were offered the chance to have their very own brick here in the plaza, thus becoming a part of what was a very successful chapter in the history of Calgary. In fact, so successful, Calgary is now in the midst of making a bid for the 2002 Winter Games. We wish them luck. Well, that's it for now. We'll see you next week for more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
Motoring 92 has been brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, one tough motor oil.